Good afternoon, fifth graders. Today we are here reading Chapter 3 of Pillage by Obert Sky. The excerpt from Section 2 of The Green Got Not as recorded by Daniel Phillips. Edward Pillage was not at all like his father. He cared only for himself and for money. Edward used the Pillage gift of growing to amass great wealth and power. In a few short years, he had become one of the richest men in Scotland. Chapter 3. Nowhere Fast. I threw my backpack onto the red cloth seat and plopped down next to it. The backpack and an old suitcase in the storage cart made up my entire entourage. I owned surprisingly little in my life besides a black shirt and jeans I was currently wearing. An old man and a young girl sat across from me in the train compartment. From the way they sat, it was obvious they didn't know one another. The old man was nose deep into a magazine. He had half-bald head and a full beard. The girl was at least my age and looked both bored and bothered that I was what she would be staring at for the next little while. It could be worse. I tried smiling a half smile at her. The girl looked at me as if she were unsure of what language I was speaking. I could be some deranged fat guy who smelled. It took a moment, but like waiting for a stubborn sunrise, her smile eventually appeared across the bottom of her face. She was the prettiest girl I had seen in a long time. "I'm back," I said. "Kate," she replied coolly. "Hi, Kate." She sort of waved. "How far are you going?" I asked. "The end of the line," she answered. "King's Plot." Kate nodded. "Me too." I said much too excitedly to come off sounding cool. Her sunrise smile faded, but that didn't stop me from staring. She was beautiful in a farmer's daughter, spell bee, charming champion kind of way. She had long red hair that was partially held back by thin black band. Her skin was white as my knuckles, as white as my knuckles had been the second before I fell from the vent. She wore a plaid skirt and long white knee-high socks. Her white shirt was mostly covered by a thick black sweater. She looked caught between styles, as if she had been preppy but was slowly switching to hippie. Her eyes watched the scenery outside. "It's far," she added. "Very far." "I'm going to live there," I said cleverly. "That's great," she replied, not bothering to turn and look at me. I missed her smile. "I have no idea what it's like there," I said, hoping she did. "I'm sure you'll get to know it." "So that's your home?" "Yes," she said flatly. The train jerked forward, grunting and hissing. I didn't like the movement. I felt like I was abandoning my mom and the little bit of life I had lived here. The half-bald man in our compartment set his magazine down and rubbed the point where his nose met his eyebrows. He looked tired and concerned about having to travel in the company of two teenagers. I watched the landscape speed up outside. In a few minutes, the world was washing by in a stream of color and stretching images. I thought about the last time I had seen my mother alive. It had been the morning of the bee incident. I complained to her that I needed some money, and she had slurred something about how everyone wants more than they have. I tried to move the words around in my head to make it seem as if she had something less profound and more personal. "So, it's a nice place?" I asked Kate. "King's Plot?" Kate looked at me and then over to the old guy. She appeared confused by the fact I was still talking to her. I suddenly wished that I was the fat, deranged man that smelled just to get back at her. "All right," I said strongly. "I guess I'll just talk to myself from now on." Kate yawned, and the old man pulled out his coat up over his head and pushed his body back into the seat. "This is my first train ride," I said, mostly to myself. "My father doesn't trust planes," she said shortly. "He has no problem sending his daughter to visit a bunch of unknown relatives in a big city, but he's concerned about me flying home." I stared at her for a moment and then said, "My father left when I was about 1." Kate shrugged and yawned again. A man in blue uniform wearing a cap 2 sizes too big for his head stepped into our compartment. "Are we all in the right spots?" he asked, as if we were babies in numbered cribs. I showed him my ticket and then looked at the others. "Don't open the window," he insisted. "The windows along this entrance section have not worked properly ever since the train derailed a month ago. The entire frame has twisted just a bit." I couldn't think of a single reason why he should be telling us that. "So, windows closed," he continued, "and if you need assistance, there will be an attendant 1 car down." Are there any vacancies? Sorry, guys. On the train?" the older man asked. "I believe we have 1 empty seat 2 cars up." The man gathered his stuff as quickly as he could and scurried from the compartment as fast as a rat abandoning a sink ship. "Have a pleasant trip," the uniformed man said to us. "I can't see how we couldn't," I answered sarcastically. The attendant's smile looked forced. Kate simply yawned again. I had never been on a train before, and the clack of the wheels as they sped forward was oddly intoxicating. Each mile we traveled, my eyelids became increasingly heavy. I tried to fight it, but sleep was smothering me. I said a couple of clever things to Kate, and she replied in unkind. I shifted my backpack and stretched out on the empty seat next to me. I pushed my head up against the small pillow the train company had provided. There was a musty smell in the cabin that made it seem even more uncomfortable than it was. I breathed slowly and could smell a trace of smoke. I would have opened my eyes to investigate it, but my mind was sick of being awake. I had not slept well ever since my mom had died. My body felt like it was in the mood to make up for lost time. I fell asleep instantly. When I woke up, Kate was staring at me. Despite my open eyes, my body still felt like it was asleep. "Did I snore?" I asked sleepily. "And drooled," she said, disgusted. I wiped my mouth and moved to sit up. My head weighed 100 pounds. I shifted and my head fell back down against the seat. I tried to blink the sleep and pain out through my eye sockets. "I don't feel so great," I said. "Maybe that's why you slept so long," Kate suggested. "How long?" 12 hours. "What?" I said in shock, sitting up. My head wobbled like a large melon with an off-balance center. "Whoa." "You slept for about 12 hours, Kate said again. "You slept through 5 stops, dinner, and unless you get up and move it, you'll miss breakfast. They stopped serving it at 9:30. "I can't believe it." My stomach growled out loud. "Maybe your stomach will convince you." "Where are we now?" I asked, looking out the window. "About 2 hours from King's Plot." The scenery was green all over. Tall trees grew along the tracks and stretched their branches over the train, creating a tunnel of foliage and making the cabin dark for the time of day. Through the breaks in the trees, I could see a dull blue lake and mountains taller than the window would allow me to take in. I might have found the view interesting, but my mind was quick to remind me that being on the train at all was the result of my loss. I felt depressed and sick. Kate closed her eyes and leaned back. I hoped she would fall asleep again and begin to drool. I lifted my backpack up off the floor and onto the empty seat next to me. I unzipped the main compartment and pulled out a thin book. It was worn journal that my mother had written in sporadically over the last few years of her life. I had read most of it while waiting for the train, but none of it made sense, and holding it depressed me even more and more. There was a small picture pretending to be a bookmark on page 27. It was a picture of my mother when she was young and happy. In the picture, she was pretty and looked like a walking beam of light. There was a man with her. I assumed he was my father. He looked smart and in love with my mom. I hated him for leaving us. I pulled out another picture of my mother from my backpack. It had been taken a month before she died. She looked like a different person than the young girl in their other photo. Her dirty blonde hair was tied back with a green felt tie, and rouge strands of hair were twisting and wriggling in all directions. Her cheeks were permanently red, and she was straining to smile. She was wearing a blue robe over a white t-shirt and sweatpants. Her feet were bare, and her toenails were speckled with chipped red nail polish. I missed her. In the history of mothers, there had certainly been better, but in fairness to history, there had most certainly been worse. The train began to pull and jerk upward. "We're going up?" I asked. Kate kept her eyes closed and any response to herself. I stood up as the train continued to pull forward and upward. I steadied myself by holding onto the plastic strap hanging from the wall. I could see the trees through the window beginning to slant at a slight angle as the train slowly climbed a mountain path. "I'm going out," I announced. "Do you want anything?" I took her silence as a no. The train's hallway was empty. The red paisley carpet looked busy and out of fashion. I walked down the corridor looking for a bathroom. The cabin next to mine was vacant, as were the next two. I used the bathroom at the end of the car and then pushed through the doors leading to the next dining car. The tables were empty. A wrinkled and scrawny man stood behind the bar, wiping the counter down. "Am I too late for breakfast?" He nodded towards the basket of muffins at the end of the bar. "Anything else?" He repeated his nod. I grabbed a muffin and took a bite. I could taste cold, bitter blueberries. I said. "Where is everyone?" He kept wiping down the counter, acting as if I hadn't asked him anything. I decided, since he wouldn't answer me, that I would go looking for myself. I moved through the dining car and into a section of sleeper compartments. The train lurched forward with hard, jarring motions. The doors to all of the sleeper compartments were open, but the compartments were empty. My insides began to feel more than just hunger. Something wasn't right. I had fallen asleep and woken up on an empty train. The next car was filled with nothing but empty seats. The same attendant who had checked my ticket earlier entered the car from the other direction. He was surprised to see me. "Yes?" he asked. "I'm just walking around," I said, looking past him. "It's best that the passengers stay in their designated seats." "What passengers?" I asked. "Not many people travel to King's Plot." "Can I walk around?" I asked. "I think not." "Can I see the captain?" I said, trying to sound young and interested in how trains run. "That would be the engineer," the attendant corrected. "And no, it's best for the safety of everyone if you return to your seat." I'm old enough to know how futile it is to argue with some adults. I turned and walked back through the car and into the dining car. The attendant followed me. "I can find my way," I said. Apparently, there's no course in train etiquette that teaches its students to be cordial. The attendant simply shooed me forward. I reached my compartment and stepped inside. I closed the sliding door behind me. Kate looked up at me and blinked. "There's nobody else on the train," I whispered. "What?" "The train is empty." "Who's driving it?" "Someone, but all the passengers are gone." "Well, not many people ride this train to the end." I didn't like the way she said, "the end." "And we're moving upward." "Into the mountains," she agreed. "King's Plot is in the Hagen Valley." "You're not bothered that there are no other people on board?" Kate shrugged. "I went through 3 cars. There was nobody but a waiter." "Maybe they're all in the cars behind us." "Maybe." I slid the door back open. I stepped in the hall and looked up and down it. The attendant was gone. "He's not there." "Who?" "The ticket dude." "I thought you said everyone was gone." The train seemed to be moving faster. "The ticket dude's still here," I said. "Who else is going to check tickets for all the missing passengers?" "I'm going to check the compartments behind me. Want to come?" Her look told me she didn't, but her knees appeared to be lifting her up. She stood next to me at the door. I was surprised she had taken me up on my offer that I froze. Well, she said. It was interesting to see her standing. Kate was 2 inches shorter than me, and her hair looked longer than I had first suspected. From this angle, she didn't look quite so bored to be alive. I slipped into the hall and began to creep down the hallway. I kept my hands against the wall so as to balance myself as I walked. I looked back every couple of seconds to make sure Kate hadn't left me. "I'm still here," she said after the fourth glance. All the compartments were empty. The next car was the same way. So was the one after that. "Don't you think this is weird?" Kate shrugged. Her action or lack thereof reminded me of my mother. For as long as I could remember, my mother had responded to me more with shrugs and grunts than with any real conversation. I felt right at home. The next car was also empty. "See?" I said anxiously. "No one else is going to King's Plot," Kate said casually. "Big deal." The trees outside the train became thicker and darkened the inside of the train even more. "I think it's weird," I said. "I think you watch too much TV," Kate said. "I'm going back." "2 more cars," I said. "There has to be someone." Kate sighed in resignation. The next 2 cars were empty, and the last one was locked with a sign above the door that read baggage. The car we're now in had a partially glass ceiling, giving us a terrific view of the tree branches weaving over the train. It also made me feel each mile forward was closing up the space we had just traveled. It felt like we were being zipped up into the mountains. No passengers, only 1 attendant. "You're forgetting that we're passengers," Kate pointed out. "You don't think this feels wrong? It feels like we're on a train climbing up a mountain. I'm going back to my seat." "Why?" I asked. "You can sit anywhere. My ticket says 32A. Who could argue with that? Kate walked out of the car and back toward the compartment. I stayed to look up the glass ceiling. The foliage was growing thicker every clack of the track. I sat down in one of the many empty seats and tried not to think about my mom. She had not always been so out of it. I could remember a time many years ago when I had mattered to her. Unfortunately, those memories were harder to pull up than the ones where she was ill and neglectful. I stood up and began to work my way back. As I stepped into the next car, I was surprised to see a single passenger sitting in one of the seats. She was an old woman with a feathery hat and a purple purse that she clutched tightly in her lap. She looked at me as though I was going to steal not only her purse, but her hat as well. I walked past her, nodding a cautious hello. I entered the next car. The rest of the train was vacant until I made it to our compartment and noticed that in the compartment next to ours there was a man sitting alone with his head down, his arms crossed against his chest. I watched him for a moment and realized he was sleeping. I stepped past his compartment and slipped into ours. Kate was sitting, looking out the window. She turned and looked at me as I entered. Our relationship was growing. "There was a couple of other passengers now," I whispered fiercely. "2 of them." "Wow." "Seriously," I said. "Where did they come from? We haven't stopped." "I don't know, Nancy Drew," Kate said, looking out the window again. "The bathroom?" "Whatever," I said, embarrassed. "I still think it's weird." The train choked as it moved up the mountain pass. The windows began to blur with small drops of water. The water swirled around the windows in wispy gray patterns. "It's raining?" I asked, stepping to the window and looking up. The trees were so thick above and around us that it felt like a tunnel of branches and leaves. I couldn't understand how the rain could even reach us. "It's the mist," Kate said. "King's Plot and these mountains are always covered with mist and fog." I looked back out the window. "It's because of the lakes," Kate added. "I need sunshine," I said, having lived most of my life in the West. "You'll be pale and vitamin D deficient in no time." "Great." Kate sighed and grimaced. I'm not sure why that made me happy. I suppose it could have something to do with the way her blue eyes looked when she grimaced at me. Where do you live? I asked. Kate opened her mouth to speak just as the train began to pick up speed. We're getting close, she insisted, instead of answering my question. We're entering the valley. And you live in the valley? I tried again. I live way up in the mountains, she said snottily. Kate gathered her few things and put them into her bag. The windows lit up as the trees thinned a bit. I could see fields and lakes through the forest. A weathered white barn with roses covering one entire wall sat in the field of thick green growth. Kate stood up and waved a small wave from her hip. I think it was directed toward me. See you, she said. With that, she was out the door and walking down the corridor. Wait, she didn't. Nice meeting you too, I said to myself. The train was still moving at the same fast pace. There was no sign of us pulling into town or into any town or dwelling. I sat in my seat and tried to figure out how to feel. I was excited to be doing something new, but I was nervous to be doing it without my mother. Even though she had been sick or confused all the time, taking care of her had always helped me move into new situations. I think the routine of me watching out for her helped keep my mind busy. Now that routine was gone. Amplifying my feelings of uneasiness was the feeling the train gave me. It didn't seem right. I felt like I was riding through an old Hollywood set that had been built to use in a movie. And the missing passengers only added to my uneasiness and heightened my desire to rethink what I was doing. Of course, I didn't have many options. I could have gone into foster care or taken the crazy train. The train began to slow down as we approached the station in King's Plot. I could see cobblestone streets and quaint buildings with shingled roofs. The trees were still all around, but they were different and taller. They had thin white trunks and bushy foliage. I could see a large fountain shaped like a roaring lion at the far end of a wide road. Behind the fountain rose a taller pillage with a taller pillage. Sorry, guys. Behind the fountain rose a tall pillar with a large clock on it. The streets looked busy. Pockets of red flowers filled window boxes and flower pots placed randomly around town. The train started to shiver slowly, and like a dying snake, it slithered into the station and gave up the ghost. I stood up and grabbed my backpack. Last stop, the attendant hollered as he came down the corridor. King's Plot, last stop. I stepped out of the compartment and looked at him. They pay you for this? I asked. Last stop, King's Plot, last stop, he hollered into my face as he walked off. I walked down the corridor and off the train. I couldn't see Kate anywhere. She had gotten off fast. There was an old man handing out suitcases. I took mine. It was only then that I had realized I had no idea who I was looking for or what to do next. Hey guys, we're going to stop there and I will join you on Monday for chapter 4.